right, well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Carl Pearson. I'm the Associate Director at the Center for the Study of the Middle East. It's wonderful to have you all with us today. The Center for the Study of the Middle East is very pleased to be hosting Hussein ALY, who asked us if he could present on a manuscript that he has just completed, and we said enthusiastically, of course. He has a book coming out in May. In fact, we have the exact date, May 23rd of 2023, called Quran Translations as a Modern Phenomenon with Brill. But that is not the manuscript he's going to be talking about today. In fact, it's a completely different text. This one has a tentative title of Imprisoned in Language, Translation Theory from the Middle East. So just a quick note about how things will run today. Hussein has agreed to speak for a little bit to present his primary ideas, and then we will open it up to Q&A. If you would leave your questions in the chat, then we will read them from there, and he will respond to them as they come in. And so without further ado, I present Hussein ALY. Thank you for coming today, Hussein.
Thank you so much, Carl, for the introduction. And thank you, Center for the Study of the Middle East, for giving me the opportunity to give that presentation on my manuscript on the history of Arabic translation. Before I start, I just, one of my teachers, one of my Egyptian teachers and professors, she was a supervisor of my PhD on translation studies, and she just has passed away yesterday. So I would like to ask you for a moment of silence to pray for her and contemplate. So a moment of silence. May her soul rest in peace. Professor Nahwat El-Arousi. Thank you so much. So let me share my screen. Toward a theory for the historical practice of Arabic translation. This, if you look at the PDF, you will find a little bit a different title where I try to explain the content more by saying phrases like imprisoned in language, which reflects the care of the Arabic translators about language. Here, it's a very similar title, but I try to focus on the historical practice of Arabic translation, describing how the Arabic translation evolved and developed from the 8th century to the 21st century. I started this research 5 years ago, and my main inquiry was, why did Arabic translation succeeded in transforming culture in the past from the 8th to the 10th century, but failed in the contemporary Arab world? The word failed actually is not my choice, but it is mentioned in one of the reports on the lamentable condition of translation in the contemporary Arab world. At the time when I started my research, I had no clue where to start. All I knew that there was a strong translation movement in the Middle Ages, and that it influenced the Arabic language in particular and Arabic culture in general. And in order to answer that question, I sought information from three sources. I know that scholars like Al-Jahiz, Ibn Qutayba, Hunayn ibn Ishaq have all expressed their opinions about translation, but I found out that most of what they said is brief and general, and they cannot lay the foundation for Arabic translation. Maybe the only exception is Ishaq ibn Hunayn. Ishaq ibn Hunayn, excuse me. Let's go back to the, yes. Ishaq ibn Hunayn wrote a short treatise of about 80 pages about his translation, and he described his approach to translation. For example, describing how he revised translation, he said, Salmawiyah, his disciple, his student, with the Syriac text, sat down opposite me, opposite Hunayn, who had the Greek text. Salmawiyah read the Syriac text aloud, and whenever Hunayn noticed something that conflicted with the Greek text, he drew Salmawiyah's attention to it and then began to correct it. So this is a sample of the revision process that Ishaq, Hunayn ibn Ishaq and his student Salmawiyah followed in revising the Syriac text. Also, Al-Safadi, who lived early 14th century, described two approaches of translation. The first is word for word, in which each Greek word has a corresponding Arabic word, an equivalent to the Greek word. The second method is sense for sense, in which a whole unit of meaning, a phrase, or a whole sentence is rendered into the target language. But these statements still are brief and general in nature. They are just used to confirm the results of my research. The second source is the research carried out by Greco-Arabists, but this is carried out only recently. Fortunately, in the late 20th and early 21st centuries, many Greco-Arabists began to pay attention to the extant manuscripts, Greek and Arabic, editing and publishing them. They compared them and commented on their linguistic differences. The results were significant, and I benefited a lot from the results of that research. And I was encouraged to carry out my own research on some of the manuscripts, this time Arabic and English translated out of the Greek, and try to examine and investigate the differences between Arabic and the Greek. Once I have enough materials, I began to analyze them. Analyzing these translations from a philological European perspective gave me a better sense of the dichotomies prevailing the European theory and practice. For example, the definition of translation. Here are some of the definitions. I'm not going to read all of them, but if you go through any definition, you will find words like, here is in the first definition, replacement, reproducing. You have source text and target text. You have another language. You have author intended, the intention of the author. Here are some more. Again, you have a source text and resulting text. A secondary communicative event. An act of communication which attempts to relay across cultural, so we have two cultures, and linguistic, so we have two languages, culture and linguistic boundaries, and so on. All the time, we have two texts, two cultures, two languages, two environments, two sets of norms, etc., with boundaries that the translator must cross. This is one thing. The other thing, the target text. So the purpose of translation is to produce the perfect target text. The target text is perfect, and end result, it is the perfect end result the translator aims at. And as such, it is an ideal or illusion that exists only in theory, not in reality. Scott Montgomery, he studied Arabic, Syriac, Pahlavi translations, and defined translation as the process of transforming a specific piece of one language, commonly a text of some sort, into another language. No, let me explain what Montgomery meant by his definition. Two words are very important here. The word process, it implies an ongoing activity. So the target text is tentative, fluid, and in constant movement. It's a process. The second word is transformation. Transformation implies a complex process that Homi Bhabha calls cultural hybridity. And there are two features of this cultural hybridity, very important for the Arabic translation in the Middle Ages, Arabic translation in the Abbasid period. So there are two features of this cultural hybridity that I tried to investigate and examine deeply during the Abbasid period. The first, the target text is not a copy of the source text. We have seen that all definitions of translation in European theory and practice talk about the target text as a copy of the source text. No, in the Abbasid period, the target text is not a copy. It combines knowledge of the source text with knowledge from the target language, the target culture. So this is number one. Number two, the source text is different from the target text without assumed or imposed hierarchy. So there is no hierarchy. The Arabic translations were a cultural hybridity because the translators, number one, added new thought to their target text. And number two, because unlike the Roman translators who saw the Greek text as masterpieces to imitate, they saw their language as equal to the Greek and capable of expressing scientific ideas. They did not imitate and displace the Greek texts. They acknowledged them, but also corrected and improved them. So this book argues that the Greco-Arabic translation was completely different in essence from the contemporary translation practice. Translation as combination. This is actually my contribution to translation studies based on my examination of Arabic translation during the Abbasid period. I redefine translation as combination, a process of remaking meaning that synthesizes multi-reality, the reality of the Greek culture and the reality of the Arabic culture. It is not just a copy of the Greek culture or the Greek language. No, it synthesizes both realities. The Arabic translator did not simply find an equivalent to the source text, but combined its meaning with the target language and culture and the target socio-political context. In addition, the Arabic translators combined knowledge from the source text with their own knowledge and experience. When they translate, when the Arabic translators of the Abbasid period translated a medical reference, they did not find it enough to just find an equivalent and translate. No, they added chapters and sections saying, well, this is the practice of medicine in Greece, but here, say in Baghdad, in Junday Shapur, we do so and so. So they combine their experience with a knowledge of the source text. A part of translating a text was adding new thought to it. It did not simply communicate its meaning, but improved it. And this is a very important point. Nowadays, we have so many terminology like adaptation, transcreation, etc. Adaptation, adapting a story to be a movie, changing of titles and endings, translation of websites, translation of slogans, translation of product names. Here, translation is fusion, where you can hardly distinguish what is added from what is original. And it is not suitable for scientific translation. But Arabic translation was a combination, but it was not fusion. It is not adaptation. It is not plagiarism. To distinguish the source text from the added parts, these new parts were written in different or thicker ink. So copyists were very conscious when they find something added that they wrote it in different ink, like red ink or thicker ink. Also, the translators, the copyists, the editors usually introduced the new added parts in separate sections or marked them with phrasal verbs that identified the author. Usually they start the added information by saying Hussein ibn Ishaq said. So when you read Hussein ibn Ishaq said, you know that this is an addition by the translator, not something belonging to the source text. Addition of original composition and thought ensured the utmost critical and creative engagement with the source text and set translation on par with writing. Okay. So when translation moved to Europe in the 12th and 13th centuries, it was greatly influenced by the earlier Arabic practice. So Latin translators also tried to add information and knowledge to the source text. They tried to engage critically and creatively, like the Arabic translators. But that soon faded out against stronger traditions, such as the Roman and the patristic. And very quickly, with the rise of philology in Europe in the 16th and 17th centuries, it was confirmed that equivalence and form are essential. So they did not care about creative engagement. They cared more about the equivalence and the form. And this is, of course, under the influence of the church as well, which sponsored the translations, and it did not want the translators to engage creatively with the source text, because this may threaten the interpretation of the Holy Book. So they don't want the translator to engage creatively. They just want the translator to produce the meaning literally. So translation started to change in Europe from the 14th century to the 17th century, and then the Romanticism and the flowery language, English language. All this influenced how people view language and view translation. The focus is on language rather than on the content. Then translation came back to the Arab world. So in the early 19th century, I will finish soon, giving you more time for questions and comments. But this is very important, how this component of creative engagement with the source text disappeared in Arabic translation. In the early 19th century, when Cairo had a strong scientific translation movement under the leadership of Muhammad Ali Pasha, Arabic translation was transitional, okay? A transitional movement. We cannot say that it is purely like the Abbasid Arabic translation, and we cannot say that it's purely European, followed the European practice, because it featured characteristics of both the Abbasid translation and the modern European translations. For example, like the Abbasid translators, the Arabic translators in Egypt engaged creatively with their source texts. So the Arabic translators in the 19th century tried, scientific translation, I mean, they also tried to add information and knowledge and chapters to the scientific books produced in Europe. But at the same time, like the European translators, they gave priority to fluency and rhetorical style. Sometimes they did not include the name of the translator who added a chapter or two to the book, and they included the name of the reviser who corrected grammar and style. So who is more important? The reviser. The name of the reviser, who is usually a scholar in Al-Azhar, a scholar of language, who corrected grammar and matters of style, is included, then his name is included on the cover, while the translator, who is a scientist, translated the book and added a chapter or two based on his knowledge of medicine, or what they or how they practice medicine in Qasr Al-Aini, the well-known hospital in Cairo. His name is not included, while the reviser who corrected grammar is included. And later on, after the end of the scientific translation movement of Muhammad Ali Pasha, translation became purely a linguistic activity, although some translators wrote introductions to their translations, but usually the introduction introduced the work, introduced the original author. It did not add knowledge. It did not add information or knowledge to the source text. It does not show any creative engagement with the source text, except in matters of language. Accompanied with a belief in the, and this is after the introduction of printing, accompanied with a belief in the print word as a sacred word, translation became a linguistic activity that should respect the print word and never add anything to the source text. Whether this made, whether this is beneficial for the Arabic language or culture or not, is not examined. What's important for a translator to be a great translator is to write in a beautiful, equivalent language to the source text. And this is how translation stopped to be influential. Of course, with the rate of illiteracy in the Arab world, because in order to enrich the language, you need what I call a spiral of influence. So when a word is invented by a translator who is a scientist and know how to create terminology, when that word is introduced, it goes into a spiral of influence. If more people from the mass, because they are, because they read, because they like science, if more people started using that word, then the word enters the common usage and enriches the language. But if less people, because they're not scientists, because they're not scholars, because they do not like reading, if less people used that word, it will not enter the common language, and the language will be static and will not develop. So in the excuse me, in the Abbasid period, translation was a combination, more focused on the production of knowledge, while in the contemporary world, translation is an equivalent and focuses on transfer of knowledge rather than production of knowledge, which is the area of authors rather than translators. So this is the end of my presentation. Thank you so much. And I think we'll have time now for questions and answers.
Thank you very much, Hussein. That was extremely interesting discussion, and I look forward to the questions. Again, please write your questions in the chat, and we will read them from there. If I may take the moderator's privilege and ask the first question. So, you know, full disclosure, as somebody, as an Aristotle scholar, somebody interested in Aristotle qua Aristotle, I am guilty of the philologist's desire to capture the original text. And what you're suggesting, though, is that scholars in the Abbasid period were interested in something different than this philological project, right? So what when I say I'm an historian, right, what I mean is I'm interested in what Aristotle meant qua Aristotle, and I'm not interested in Aristotle qua knowledge production in your terms here in the 21st century. So it strikes me then that the relationship of the translator to the source text is going to be very different, right? With sacred text, it's going to be one sort of issues, but with non-sacred text, things like Aristotle or the ancient Greek philosophers generally, the question then that I have is, what is the attitude taken by these Abbasid translators to those source texts? Since they are not divinely inspired, then they're not going to be, true regardless. And yet they are productive of knowledge in the sense that you can translate them in your sense of the term and produce something closer to, what is true or what is legitimate knowledge. So the question then is, what is the relationship to source texts for your scholars, for your Abbasid era scholars, since they're not interested in recovering the text qua text, or the author qua author? Why do they think it's valuable in the first place? Like what's valuable there to capture?
Yeah, thank you so much. This is a great question, and probably I was not clear enough. So this would give me an opportunity to explore more, elaborate more on this point. So philology is very important, but it is the first step. It is not the first step, the second step, the 10th step, and forever. No, it's very important as a first step. So the Abbasid translators focused on language, focused on the source text, tried to produce the closest possible equivalent to the source text, and that's it. So this is the first step. After that, they internalized the knowledge of the source text, and they externalized new knowledge. So they did not stop at this, like we do. If you translate a book, revised it, the language is excellent, grammar is excellent, that's it. You publish it and that's it. You end your relationship with that book and you start a new book, maybe in a totally different field. The Abbasid did not do that. They produced a good equivalent to the source text, but they did not stop. They internalized the meaning and they added from their own knowledge and experience to the source text. And when the Muslim scholars came and read their translation, they learned that. So the importance of translation is not just transferring knowledge, but the approach that's used and the approach that the Muslim scholars learned from the translation. They learned that it is not enough to transfer knowledge. They learned that this is to read and internalize, this is the first step, and then you need to add from their own to the body of knowledge. So this is what the translators did first, and the Muslim scholars followed. Imagine that the Arabic translators just produced excellent equivalents to the source text, and that's it. And the Muslim scholars came and read the source text and used them, and that's it. So knowledge will not be promoted. What happened is that they added and applied knowledge, and this is what they learned from the translators. So without the translators, it would be difficult unless real brilliant scholars came and read the source text and invented that approach. But the translators did a great job in introducing that approach to the Muslim scholars that read, internalize, add from your own to the body of knowledge. So the difference is we stop at the philological stage. They did not. Yeah. So I think we have some questions on the chat.
We do. Do you just want
Do
to read them out loud, and or
Yeah,
you want
why
me to
not?
read them?
Muhammad Kamil, do you think modern day highly domesticated, mostly literary translations in Arabic foster isolation and self-enclosure? So I did not talk about literary translation. Literary translation, when they are creative, either they offer a new adaptations or infusion. So you cannot distinguish what is added from what is not added. Some people change the title, change the ending of the story, etc. But I did not tackle actually literary translation. Literary translation is a totally different story. My focus was on scientific translation. But to respond to your questions, I don't think literary, highly domesticated and literary translation, why should it foster isolation and self-inclusion? It could play different roles. And Professor, I hope Muhammad, this answered your question. Excuse me. Professor John Walbridge, how would you categorize modern adaptations of European knowledge? Simplifications, adaptations, popularizations. You can read the question, right? Critiques, etc. Do these differ fundamentally from similar kinds of abbasid texts? The only difference is that the Abbasid respected the Greek text very much. So they produced equivalent texts to the extent that when Latin translators came later in Europe, they were able to translate the Arabic text and claim that this is very close to the Greek text. And indeed, when they discovered the Greek manuscripts, they were right. The Arabic translation was sometimes literal, very close to the source text. It did not change anything, any meaning. But then the importance is the added parts. The European, the current translation practice are adaptations, simplifications, popularizations, etc. You cannot discover the source text out of them because there is fusion, there is displacement, there is no respect to the source text. Imagine that a text by Tolstoy and you changed the ending of the story, you changed the title, you changed the names of the characters, you changed the place. It's a new text. And this is different from Ibn al-Muqaffa when he translated Kalila and Dimna. He translated it as it is, but he added a story of his own in a new section so that you can say, oh, that part is added by Ibn al-Muqaffa, whereas the rest is the original text and so on. So it is not actually similar to the Abbasid text. It's totally different. Abbasid text translations were combinations where you can, by the end of the day, separate the different components and say, well, this is the Greek contribution and this is the Arabic contribution. Dr. Shayma Saeed, Thank you, Dr. Hussein, for such an enlightening research topic. My question is, if the purpose nowadays, translation is the production of knowledge rather than a transfer of knowledge, wouldn't this confuse the role of authorship and of translation? In other words, the author's role will be confused with the translators. Thank you. Okay, Dr. Shaima Said, as I have explained, the first step the Abbasid did is that they produced an equivalent to the source text out of great respect to the authors, to the Greek authors, Plato, Aristotle, etc. Then they added their own knowledge and their own experience, their own reality. And when they do that, they introduced these in with thick ink or a separate section or phrasal verbs like قال حنين ibn إسحاق. So there is actually a clear role for the author and a clear role for the translator. They were different from the Romans who displaced the Greek text. The Romans just infused, adapted the Greek text. So you do not know the translator from the author. No, the Arabic translators did not do that. They respected the source text and added to them. This is the same question by Dr. Shaimi. Okay.
We do have time for additional questions, so please feel free to ask them.
You can also say your question if maybe writing will take time. So if you prefer to ask, just ask your question, or if you have a comment, you can say it. But it is very difficult now to change the translation practice unless first you start with redefining translation and its role in the society. So I hope if we are aware that translation can be redefined differently from what we read in translation theory and practice nowadays, our awareness that we can redefine translation would lead us to think of our practice of translation. Also, literary, creative translation is different from scientific translation. So one of the contributions also of the book is that it focuses on scientific translation. To the best of my knowledge, there is only 1 or 2 books written on scientific translation, European scientific translation. Most of the books focus on religious and literary translation. So also we need to think of scientific translation versus literary and religious translation. Well, I have another question by Samar Nabil. Well, I would just like to add that what you mean is that translation is a metamorphosis. I prefer to use the word combination. You combine your reality and knowledge with the knowledge of the source text. So if you can elaborate on your definition, I would be grateful. What exactly do you mean? Or how your concept can contribute to translation? Thank you, Dr. Iman Sharif. Professor John Walbridge, could you talk a little more about Abbasid translators correcting the content of the text they translated and the ways in which they marked mistakes they identified? The book includes a whole chapter on the intervention of Arabic translators. They corrected, particularly in astrology and sometimes in medicine as well. As far as I remember, Hussein ibn Ishaq found a name of a seed that cures a certain disease. And he said, that name is wrong, and it should be written on the margin, and it must be a mistake by a copyist, and that the correct seed is flax seed, not the other one. So this is one way they corrected the content of a medical text. Sometimes they do not just correcting, but in another text, Hussein ibn Ishaq said that in my school, the way they treat the eye is different from the Greek, and it's worthy mentioning. And he then described what they do in the Eastern school, what they do in John D. Shapur, and how it is different from the Greek practice. The calculations of the day, week, month, year was also corrected by one of the translators, saying that if we follow the Greek calculations, we'll end up with, I can't remember the number of seconds, but he said the difference will be a few seconds. The number of seconds, he gave the number of seconds, and his calculations remained the closest to the scientific, the correct calculations up till now. So this is what they did in the few manuscripts that I studied. Okay. And then at the end of this research journey, which side would you take as a translator, or what would you recommend, generation or transfer of knowledge? Of course, if the translator can produce a correct translation so as to reflect and express the meaning of the author as much as possible, and was able to internalize the knowledge and information of the source text and take this as a first step and started externalizing on the basis of his translation, new knowledge, and he produced that new knowledge, whether as part of the translation or a separate book, this would be the best practice. So, of course, generation of knowledge is very important, but it cannot be done without first transfer of knowledge and understanding exactly what the author said in the text. Okay. Have another question?
Yes, I would I would just like to elaborate my idea of metamorphosis,
Please.
because well, really, I thought it at the beginning. I thought it was about literary texts, not scientific texts, and then when you said that cultural translation is a kind of hybridity, and by hybridity, I could really understand that it's like mixing between these two, the source text and the target text, to maybe by using the domestication and foreignization method, because if I did really use the domestication, which being real to the text, to the author, to the everything, okay, but sometimes you don't find the exact word or the linguistic sign or morphology for the word exactly as is. So we use foreignization, okay, to keep the culture or to reflect the culture of the source text, okay? So sometimes we use foreignization in order to keep the identity of the source text, rather than domestication, okay? So I am not sure if this is my point. And, by transformation, I'm changing something. But metamorphosis is like a cycle where there's always transformation, and then there is a point where there's complete metamorphosis. And it's, as you exactly said, it's something completely new. It's not just copied, but it's reimagined in some way to become something new. And that's what hybridity is. It makes sameness into difference, while the difference into sameness, where the difference is no more different and the same is no more the same. So that's what I mean exactly.
Okay.
Am I correct about this?
Yes, you are. Yeah, you are very clear. Thank you so much. So I have a question also for you. In using metamorphosis or domestication or foreignization and producing back translation, can you go back and produce the source text? Like
by including
when you put sugar in the water, can you go back and separate sugar and water?
Well, maybe by evaporation.
Not by just if you
not all of them,
like producing a back translation, not by using computers and analysis and labs and all these things. Just you put a spoon of sugar
probably not.
and water, and 5 minutes you changed your mind and you want the sugar separate from the water.
No, of course not.
You cannot. So this is the modern European practice of translation, adaptation, foreignization, domestication, or the new term you are using to describe translation, metamorphosis. You cannot go back. In Arabic translation, you can very simply go back and separate the source text from what is added. So this is the main difference. The respected
but I mean, are you for? I'm sorry for interrupting.
Yes,
I mean, are you for metamorphosis or for the direct forward text? And it's like if you are imposing this their idea or interiorization of what they add, like for example using adaptation and using a voiceover to add the director's point of view or the narrator's point of view, okay, which is an adaptation from a novel, or what is.
All these are not valid for scientific translation. These may be valid for literary translation, but for
Yes.
scientific translation, we should care about adding to the body of knowledge and applying that
Yes.
knowledge. Otherwise, translation will be in vain.
Okay, thank you
That's all.
very much. Thank you,
You're-
Doctor, very much. Thank
You're
you.
welcome. Thank you,
you.
Dr. Summer.
Thank you.
And this is Muhammad Kamil again, Carl, right? Most Abbasid translators were field practitioners, physicians, mathematicians, astronomers, etc. Is this another reason why they help produce rather than transfer knowledge? Do we need modern field practitioners to practice translation rather than translators who are just language experts? Thank you so much, Muhammad, for that question. But in fact, many of them are not field practitioners. In fact, they learned a new approach when they started translation, and they learned that new approach from the School of Alexandria. So they learned that very simply, that when you read a book, it is not enough to read the book. It's important to internalize the knowledge in that book and write on the margin, well, I think so and so. I will apply this in a different way. In the Arab world, we cannot apply this. In the Arab world, we need to modify this, and so on. So you engage critically and creatively with the book you are reading. That's what they learned. It is not enough to read to transfer knowledge. It's important to apply knowledge and add to knowledge, very simply. And because they did that, they started practicing medicine. Hussein ibn Ishaq tried to study medicine with, I can't remember the name of his teacher. His teacher was bad-tempered, and he dismissed him from his classes. He did not want Hussein ibn Ishaq to ask many questions. So he told him, go work like your father. His father was a money broker. He used to give people money and take extra money from them, something like that. And he told him that it's better for you to work as a merchant as your father, and dismissed him from his classes. Hussein ibn Ishaq studied Greek. Then in the court, they needed a Greek translator. They summoned Hussein ibn Ishaq to translate some Greek text. When he translated the Greek text, he used that approach of reading, understanding, internalizing, and writing down his own thoughts. And he became one of the best physicians. Okay? So whenever you're reading something, you need to focus on how this would benefit me. Not just focusing on the information, but focusing on applying the knowledge you read in a book and adding to that knowledge. Professor Shahrani, how did the translators' interventions in adding additional content to the translated text relate to the tradition of marginal commentary, which followed in tafsir and other significant texts within the Arabic language, not translation as such, which was part of the publication tradition in Muslim civilization through the ages? Were they somehow related or not? Yes, they are related. And I did not study that feature very much, but I think I can say that the commentary tradition also learned from translation. The first noticeable commentator is Ibn Sina. Ibn Sina read the text and wrote down his own ideas and thoughts. He said that, well, the Greek philosophy is excellent, but we can modify the Greek philosophy on the basis of Islam. So he started introducing features from Islam to the Greek philosophy, and he ended up with the Islamic philosophy. on the basis of his commentary on Aristotle. Ibn Rushd decided to do something different. He just commented without any intervention in the text, just explained the text literally. And after he finishes, he goes to his own writing and wrote down what he thought of the Greek philosophy. So he did not want to combine commentary with the source text. He went out and wrote down his own books where he added knowledge and applied them. And this is what Europe preferred, just to translate literally, to comment on a text literally, and then go and write your own book if you are interested. But then we do not do that. We just stop at translating or commenting literally. Did this answer your question, Professor Shahrani? So I think the translators
Thank you
started
very
this.
much, Dr.
Yes,
Ali.
please.
It's a tremendous accomplishment and achievement, and we congratulate you.
Thank you so much, Professor. Thank you so much. And thank you, Umama. Thank you very much for such interesting lecture. I don't know where you will post the recordings. Carla, I think they will be on the Facebook page or something.
They will be, yeah, the recording of the lecture will be posted on Sesame's homepage, which is
Yeah.
csme.indiana.edu. It'll
Okay.
take us a few days to process the video, but we'll get it up in a week or so.
So thank you very much, Carl. We have Yasser Said asking about Dr. طه عبد الرحمن theory of الترجمة المستقلة أو الاستقلالية. The translator mainly. I've read Dr. طه عبد الرحمن's book on translation several years ago, and as far as I remember, he did not very much consider the European theory and practice. And I think if he integrated European theory and practice with his thoughts, he would end up contributing more to translation theory. So as far as I remember, there are points that would benefit from European theory and practice. He was criticizing European theory and practice, but he did not suggest actually solutions to the gaps that he found. That's I can remember. If you have, Yasser Said, if you have further comments, please do. Thank you, Dr. Samar Nabil. Ayman Saad. Okay, thank you, Ayman. So you started translation with me at the American University in Cairo. Thank you, Ayman.
Well, if there are no further questions,
Yes.
please join me in thanking our speaker today. And you can applaud silently behind your Zoom box, or you can raise your hand. There we go. I see some applause appearing. It really was a fascinating talk and a really impressive accomplishment. I look forward to seeing the book in print. And as I said, we will post the talk on the Sesame webpage here in the next few days. So on behalf of the Center for the Study of the Middle East, thank you, Hussein Ali, for your presence today, and thanks to everyone for coming.
Thank you so much. Thank you for attending. Thank you.